It began with a single missing person report, a worried family searching for answers. But when police entered the unassuming home of Jake Turner, what they uncovered would shock a nation. Beneath the colorful walls of his cozy suburban house, hidden beneath a trapdoor in the crawlspace, lay a secret no one could have imagined. 33 shallow graves. To his neighbors, Jake Turner was a cheerful, reliable presence. A local favorite at children's birthday parties, he was known for his painted clown face, his infectious laugh, and his ability to make everyone around him smile. He was the last person anyone would suspect of harboring a dark side. But behind that painted smile, Turner lived a double life. A life of manipulation, deceit, and unimaginable cruelty. Over the span of 5 years, Turner lured young men to his home under the guise of friendship and opportunity. Promises of jobs, drinks, or just a good time. None of them ever left, and no one, not even his closest friends or family, suspected a thing. So, how did Jake Turner, a man who seemed so harmless, so ordinary, become one of the most prolific killers in modern history? How did the community's favorite entertainer conceal his sinister truth for so long? And what led police to finally uncover his monstrous acts? In tonight's documentary, we unravel the chilling story of the Painted Killer. From his charming public persona to the psychological unraveling of a man capable of such horrifying crimes, we take you deep into the mind of a killer who hid in plain sight. Prepare to be haunted by the twisted duality of a man who made children laugh and left a trail of devastation in his wake. This is the story of Jake Turner, the man behind the mask. Before the world knew Jake Turner as the Painted Killer, he was simply Jake, a quiet, unassuming boy growing up in the sleepy town of Willow Creek. Born in 1982 to working-class parents, Jake's early years were marked by a mixture of love and loneliness. His father was a factory worker, his mother a nurse, and their long shifts often left Jake to his own devices. From a young age, Jake learned how to entertain himself, drawing, performing magic tricks, and, most notably, perfecting his clown makeup. His mother often said he had a gift for making people laugh, though Jake himself rarely smiled when the makeup came off. Neighbors recall him as polite, if a bit odd. He wasn't the type of boy to join neighborhood baseball games or hang out at the diner with friends. Instead, Jake preferred the solitude of his room or the woods behind his house, where he'd practice juggling or test his hand at amateur ventriloquism. Classmates from high school describe him as the weird kid, someone who tried too hard to fit in but never quite managed. He was always there, but never really part of the group, recalls former classmate Melanie Carter. He'd crack jokes that didn't land, but you could tell he was desperate for people to like him. After graduating high school, Jake drifted aimlessly for a few years. He worked odd jobs, mostly labor-intensive and low-paying, but he could never hold one down for long. Then, in his mid-20s, he stumbled upon a role that seemed tailor-made for him: a children's entertainer. Armed with his self-taught magic tricks and signature clown persona, Jake became a hit at local birthday parties and community events. Jake had this way with kids, says Sarah Jennings, a former client. He wasn't just entertaining. He made everyone feel like they were the center of the universe. Parents loved him because he was reliable and affordable. The kids loved him because, well, he was just fun. For nearly a decade, Jake built his reputation as a dependable, cheerful presence in Willow Creek. He never missed a booking, and his act only grew more elaborate with time. By his 30s, he was a household name, not just in Willow Creek, but in the surrounding towns. No one saw the cracks in the painted facade. But there were cracks, small ones that, in hindsight, painted a troubling picture. There was the young man who worked part-time as Jake's assistant and suddenly stopped showing up one day. When asked, Jake shrugged it off, claiming the man had moved away. Then there were rumors of Jake's short temper when things didn't go according to plan. A waitress at a local diner remembers Jake snapping at her over a spilled drink, his expression darkening in a way she described as almost unrecognizable. It was like a switch flipped, she says. One minute, he was laughing and joking, and the next, it was like his eyes went cold. And yet, these moments were fleeting, easily dismissed. After all, everyone has bad days, right? Jake's charm and his unwavering commitment to his craft masked any deeper concerns. No one suspected the man who made balloon animals and juggled fire was capable of anything sinister. But beneath the surface, Jake was already showing the traits that would later define his crimes. He was meticulous, methodical, and deeply manipulative. Friends would later admit that Jake had a way of making you feel special, like you were the only person in the room. He was attentive, almost obsessively so, always remembering the smallest details about others while revealing little about himself. As Jake's popularity grew, so too did his boldness. He began inviting young men to his home under various pretenses. Some were promised work as assistants, others simply struck up a casual friendship with the affable entertainer. Many of these men were transient, estranged from family or struggling to find stability. They were the kind of people who could disappear without causing an immediate stir, a fact Jake would later exploit to horrifying effect. Jake had this way of picking people who were vulnerable, says Dr. Elena Harper, a criminal psychologist who studied the case. He sought out individuals who were isolated, who wouldn't be missed right away. It was calculated, and it was chilling. To outsiders, Jake's life seemed almost idyllic. His house, though modest, was well kept and adorned with whimsical decorations. His front yard featured a small wooden sign that read, "Jake's Happy Place." Inside, however, was a different story. Hidden beneath the carefully curated charm was a home filled with secrets, a home where nightmares unfolded. By the time the first missing person report was filed, Jake's crimes had already spanned several years. But no one, not the police, not his friends, and certainly not the families who hired him, could have guessed that the man they trusted was living a double life. How could someone so seemingly ordinary, so deeply woven into the fabric of the community, conceal such darkness? The answer lies in the duality of Jake Turner, a man who mastered the art of deception and wore his painted smile like a mask, hiding his true nature from the world. As we delve deeper into his story, the picture becomes clearer, and the cracks in his facade become impossible to ignore. The first sign that something was wrong came in the summer of 2017. A young man named Ryan Edwards failed to show up at his sister's wedding, a day he had been excitedly talking about for months. Ryan's family, confused and worried, called the police. At first, the authorities treated it as a typical missing persons case. Adults, after all, often disappeared voluntarily. But as days turned into weeks, and Ryan's phone went silent, his family's pleas became harder to ignore. Ryan wasn't the first young man to disappear in the area, but there had been no connection between the cases, at least not yet. Police began digging into Ryan's recent activities and discovered he had last been seen leaving a local diner with Jake Turner. To the investigators, Jake seemed harmless, if a bit eccentric. After all, he was the town's beloved children's clown. Still, they decided to pay him a visit. When officers knocked on Jake Turner's door, they were met with his trademark charm. "Ryan, oh yeah," Jake said with a broad smile. "He helped me with a gig the other day. Nice kid. Haven't seen him since." His demeanor was so disarming, so genuine, that the officers left without much suspicion. But Ryan's family wasn't convinced. They insisted Jake knew more than he was letting on. As pressure mounted, police revisited Turner's name in connection with other missing persons reports. Patterns began to emerge. Many of the victims were young men who lived on the fringes of society, runaways, laborers, or drifters who had few ties to the community. And Jake Turner seemed to have a habit of befriending them before their disappearances. Still, there was no concrete evidence tying Jake to any crime. That changed in the fall of 2017 when a neighbor reported a foul odor coming from Jake's property. At first, Jake explained it away as plumbing issues, but the smell persisted, and neighbors grew increasingly uneasy. Police obtained a warrant to search the home, a move that would lead to one of the most chilling discoveries in modern criminal history. When investigators entered Jake Turner's house, they were struck by how ordinary it seemed. Almost too ordinary. The living room was filled with clown memorabilia, costumes, oversized shoes, even a wall of framed photographs from birthday parties. But beneath this cheerful facade lay an undercurrent of unease. In the kitchen, officers noticed a trapdoor hidden beneath a rug. With growing dread, they pried it open and descended into the crawlspace. What they found would haunt them forever. The crawlspace was cramped and damp, filled with the unmistakable stench of decay. As flashlights swept across the dirt floor, officers noticed what appeared to be shallow graves, dozens of them. Forensics later confirmed the remains of 33 victims, all young men who had vanished over the span of 5 years. It was like something out of a nightmare, recalls Detective Mark Daniels, one of the lead investigators. You always hear about monsters, but you don't expect to find one living among you. Jake Turner was arrested on the spot, but even in handcuffs, he maintained his composure. He denied any wrongdoing, claiming he had no idea how the bodies ended up in his home. But the evidence was overwhelming. Inside his bedroom, police found personal belongings of the victims, watches, wallets, and even clothing. Incriminating DNA evidence tied Jake directly to the crimes. The interrogation that followed would reveal the true depths of Jake Turner's depravity. At first, he remained tight-lipped, insisting on his innocence. But as investigators laid out the evidence, Jake's mask of charm began to crack. He eventually confessed to the murders, describing in chilling detail how he had lured his victims with promises of friendship, work, or a place to stay. "They trusted me," Jake said during his confession, his voice disturbingly calm. "I made them feel safe. That's all it took." Investigators were struck not only by the horror of Jake's actions, but by the meticulous planning behind them. He targeted victims who were less likely to be reported missing and avoided drawing attention to himself. His clown persona had been his greatest disguise, a mask that allowed him to hide in plain sight. The community was left reeling as the details of Jake's crimes came to light. Parents who had once hired him for birthday parties struggled to reconcile the man who had made their children laugh with the monster he truly was. Friends and neighbors who had shared barbecues and small talk with Jake were horrified that they had never seen the signs. "It's terrifying to think someone like that could be so close to you," says Sarah Jennings, a former neighbor. "You think you know someone, but do you ever really know?" The investigation into Jake Turner's life didn't just reveal the extent of his crimes. It also raised troubling questions about how he had managed to operate unnoticed for so long. How many lives could have been saved if someone had spoken up earlier? And how could a man so deeply woven into the fabric of his community hide such unimaginable darkness? As Jake Turner's trial loomed, the community braced itself for the revelations yet to come. But for the families of the victims, one question lingered above all others. Why? What drove this seemingly ordinary man to commit such monstrous acts? The answer, as we'll explore next, lies in the twisted mind of Jake Turner. Jake Turner's crimes were as calculated as they were horrifying. Over a span of 5 years, he lured 33 young men to his home, each one carefully chosen. His victims shared common traits. They were often vulnerable, isolated, and looking for connection. Jake offered them exactly what they were seeking: a warm smile, a friendly ear, and the promise of something better. But behind the charm was a predator waiting to strike. Turner's method followed a chillingly consistent pattern. He would meet his victims in casual settings, at a bar, a diner, or even on the street. Using his clown persona as an icebreaker, he built trust quickly, making them feel at ease. Once inside his home, the atmosphere shifted. What began as casual conversation or drinks would escalate into a nightmare. Jake used a combination of charm, manipulation, and brute force to subdue his victims. Some were drugged, others were overpowered physically. "He thrived on control," explains Dr. Elena Harper, a criminal psychologist who studied Turner's case. The act of luring his victims, gaining their trust, and then taking their lives was a demonstration of his dominance. For Jake, it wasn't just about the killing, it was about the power he held over them. After murdering his victims, Jake meticulously concealed their bodies in the crawlspace beneath his house. Police noted that the graves were evenly spaced and carefully dug, a detail that speaks to the level of planning involved. Forensic analysis revealed that some of the victims had been buried with personal items, a macabre reminder of the lives Jake had taken. It was as though he saw them not as people, but as trophies. What makes a man like Jake Turner commit such unspeakable acts? Experts point to a complex mix of psychological factors. Turner exhibited traits of both a sociopath and a narcissist. He was manipulative, lacked empathy, and craved attention. His clown persona allowed him to fulfill his narcissistic need for admiration, while masking his darker urges. The painted smile became his shield, says Dr. Harper. He used it to project an image of joy and innocence, all while hiding the monster underneath. The clown wasn't just his disguise, it was his weapon. For Jake Turner, the line between his two lives blurred completely. By day, he was the cheerful entertainer bringing joy to children. By night, he was a cold, calculated killer who thrived on the suffering of others. It's a duality that continues to haunt those who knew him and those who survived his reign of terror. Jake Turner's confession was as chilling as the crimes themselves. Sitting across from detectives, he spoke with a disturbing calm, detailing how he lured his victims, the moments leading up to their deaths, and how he meticulously buried them beneath his home. It wasn't personal, he said, almost dismissively. They were just there. The courtroom was packed when Jake's trial began, with families of the victims seeking justice and answers. Turner showed little remorse, his demeanor unnervingly detached as the prosecution presented evidence of his atrocities. In the end, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the families, the verdict brought a measure of closure but could never erase the pain. The community of Willow Creek, once trusting and carefree, was left shaken, its innocence stolen. Jake Turner's painted smile now serves as a haunting reminder. Monsters can hide in plain sight.